Welcome to this new podcast in which we celebrate and learn from the leadership insights and experiences of some of the amazing leaders we have featured in our Leaders 50 listing of the world's most inspiring organizational leaders. I'm delighted that alongside me, metaphorically at least, I have Sanyin Shang. Sanyin is a CEO coach, advisor to corporations such as Novartis, Elf Beauty, the US Congressional Award and Privateer Space. She is a professor at Duke University's Pratt School of Engineering and leads the Coach K Center on Leadership and Ethics at its Fuqua School of Business. Most importantly, of course, Sanyin is a Thinkers 50 award winner and one of the world's 50 most important management thinkers. Sanyin, great to see you as always.
Thank you so much, Stuart. And then let me not miss on the opportunity to brag about you, Stuart. Stuart Craner is my co-host. He is a co-founder of Thinkers 50, which is the world's premier global ranking of management thinkers, or as the Financial Times call it, the Academy Awards of Management Thinking. He is a prolific author of management books, and because of his range of expertise and leadership ideas and his curatorial genius, and his very British sense of humor, he is also one of my favorite thought partners. And now today to our guest, Deb Liu. Deb was raised in South Carolina, went to Duke University, where actually, just as an aside, Duke and I met in college, and we have been great friends ever since. This is a 30-plus year relationship. So I'm very, very proud when she got recognized as a member of the inaugural Leaders 50 list. Then she went on to attend Stanford Business School, joined PayPal, and then eBay and Facebook before becoming the CEO of Ancestry in 2021. She's also the co-founder of Women in Product, which is a community of over 30,000 managers and executives in product management, and she's also a board director of Intuit. Now, in early 2025, because of medical reasons, Deb left her job with Ancestry and is currently enjoying some time off. Although we have just read a brilliant blog by her daughter, Bethany, which suggests that the notion of time off is a little bit alien to our good friend Deb. So, Stuart, why do you take it away with the first question?
Well, can we start fairly near the beginning, Deb? What was it like being brought up in Columbia, South Carolina? A place I had to look. I had to look it up.
Oh, it's a small town between Columbia and Charleston.
Okay, and it's famous for its fireflies.
It's a beautiful place.
And your parents had come to the US from China. So what was your early experience being brought up there?
Yeah, my parents came to America to go to college with, they applied to one school and came to a country that they had never been to with a couple suitcases, a few $100s, and they knew that they had to make enough money to make it home if they ever wanted to go see their parents again. And I just remember, them sharing a lot about their early struggles when they were here. They were here for college. They eventually met and married. And then they decided to move to a small town in the deep South, inexplicable to the 6-year-old me. And, growing up, being very different from the people around us was really hard. But for my parents, this was the American dream. They had a house with a big yard. They lived in a community that, not everyone accepted us, but enough people did that we felt like, there was a place that we could call home.
Deb, I've known you ever since your first career after college. If I remember, it was BCG. And when you visit DC, you'll be crashing at my place. I know you went on to PayPal, Facebook. Was there a golden thread? I never asked you this question because you just excelled at everything you step into, because I know you have the standard of excellence. But is there a golden thread throughout your career, like why you made one choice over the other, just tell us how you think through your career choices.
Well, I think it was Steve Jobs who said that you can't see the thread looking forward. You can only see it looking backwards. You can only connect the dots after the picture is made. And I think that's absolutely true. Sometimes an unmade picture, there's just a bunch of blank spots. And, I encourage a lot of people to think about that, which is each thing that you do is adding to the knowledge and the abilities that you have for the next thing and the next thing, and you're building your career, your life around all of the things that happened before. And so for me, I studied engineering in undergrad, and I went to consulting, and the next natural step was business school. So I went to Stanford. And when I was graduating, I really wanted to move back east, and we couldn't find jobs. It was the year 2002. It was a really difficult time to find jobs for entry-level folks. And so I stumbled on a startup. I was at a career fair, and I saw this table for PayPal. And the first recruiter at PayPal, Tim Wenzel, was there. And I walked up and I just said, "I love your product. I use it all the time." And I was walking away, and he's like, "Do you want a job?" And I said, "Actually, I'm moving back east. Thanks." And he's like, "No, no, no. Would you like to come see our offices, interview?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" I mean, I had the next day off. I said, "Why not?" And I remember sitting next to him was Catherine Wu. She was most known for leading Airbnb.org. And I had seen her in classes before, and I said to her, he said to me, "Do you want to do product or marketing?" And I said, I had no idea what those roles were. I looked at her and I said, "What do you do?" She said, "Product." And I said, "That sounds good. I'll do what she does." And suddenly I am in a product management field, and they interviewed me for this job. And I interviewed it seemed like everybody, all the way up to Amy Clement, who's the VP of product, and David Sachs, who's the COO, the CPO. And I talked to them, and they just kept asking me, "What would you build?" And I had so many ideas of things. As a customer, just love building things. And so I just told them all the things. And then I showed up first day of work, and I'm like, "What is this job?" And they're like, "All those ideas of things you wanted to build, go build them." And that started me on a path to building products for the next 20 years here in Silicon Valley. And it's been an incredible adventure.
Just a quick follow-up to that. So what I heard there is this idea of allowing for serendipity, right? You were gone home, coming back east, and then you're like looking for jobs. Let's go to this career fair. PayPal was on the West Coast in the Bay Area. This was probably 1997,
2002. It's 2002.
much further up, but still early, at the early start of the entire Silicon Valley growth. And then you've been in technology, and I think in technology, things are moving so fast. I love what you said is you can't figure out the threads until you look back, because the type of jobs that we will be in 5 years from now probably doesn't even exist yet, because that's how fast things are in technology, huh?
Well, I think that at the time we were just going through the internet revolution. The dot-com bust had happened. The next wave of companies were coming along. And it's just things were changing so fast. And now, even today, we live in, as they say, unprecedented times. It is a time of great uncertainty, but also great opportunity. And I think that it has been such an incredible adventure to live in Silicon Valley at so many of these pivot points. So the internet was one, mobile has been such an opportunity. And now just looking at what is to come, I think that AI brings a whole new set of challenges, but also a whole new set of opportunities. And I think, they say fortune favors the bold. It's the people who step in and say, "I want to try this. I want to figure out what this looks like in my career." Those are the ones who are going to evolve their career. And for me, stepping into PayPal, I didn't know, I never worked in tech other than interning at eBay. And then eventually, stepping into Facebook when social media was coming along. I worked on mobile when the time was right, and I had an opportunity to kind of ride multiple waves through many, many changes.
Do you think there's a power of going into a company, as you said, you went into PayPal as a customer?
Yeah.
It's completely, it's kind of a very different, it's kind of a strange thing, but it's a very different perspective, isn't it?
Yes. Well, you know what surprised me when I got there was I was a big eBay seller. I was a power seller at one point. Was so few of the employees used the product for that purpose. And yet that was our biggest business. And so I got an opportunity to do so much more than I ever could because I was such an avid user. I knew the product inside and out. I talked to other sellers and I had customers and I knew what the pain points were. And I think it's one thing to academically think about a problem, and it's another thing to feel it, viscerally feel it. And so I teach teams and product leaders to fall in love with the problem. You don't have to be the focus group of one, but you have to fall in love with the problem such that you understand what customers are feeling. What are the pinch points? What are the things that they're trying to do that they're unable to do? And that's what really makes it possible for you to be a great product leader and a great product thinker. And I think sometimes we just, our job is our job, but actually, really feeling the customer empathy is such an important part of the role.
The Chinese company Hire talks about zero distance. So zero distance between its employees and customers. And I think it's a really powerful idea, because I think if you achieve that.
Yes, absolutely. And I remember when I was interviewing for the board of Intuit, I had been using their products for eons. And I did my own taxes on TurboTax every year. So I had a lot of thoughts. We also had QuickBooks for our small business that I had with my sister. We had actually set up a server so we could create it, so we could check it in and out, because we couldn't. There were just so many things. And I interviewed for that job. I actually interviewed for the board role. I had a chance to meet the CEO. And I just remember telling him, here are all the things as a customer I see where the seams between your products are. Here are the things. And I said, I just took this opportunity to say this. I'm nobody. I'm totally fine if you don't pick me for the board, but I just want to leave it all in the field. And he's at the very end of the meeting, he's like, how would you like to join our board? And it's because I do embody a lot of customers who just feel viscerally how much love I had for their product. And they have spent, they really care about customer feedback. They really, they do Follow Me Homes, where Scott Cook had taken, you buy the software and he follows you home, and, he watched you install it. And so it's part of their ethos. And that's what I love about Intuit and why I've joined the board.
So in leadership, leadership is actually about a different type of product. The product is a people, right? And one of the things that I've always admired about you is your ability to unflinchingly give tough feedback, and also your ability to unflinchingly solicit feedback, the good and the bad and ugly. So tell us a little bit more about that, and give us a tip for giving tough feedback.
Well, I'll give you an example where, people don't give leaders hard feedback. I remember one leader that was a mentor for me said, once you reach a certain level, nobody tells you the truth anymore, because they're afraid, because they feel self-conscious, because they're not sure you want to hear the truth. And I just remember that sitting really difficult with me, because I was pretty junior when he was mentoring me, and I became the same level as him eventually in the organization. And later I said, you're absolutely right. And if you don't have a trusted team who are telling you the truth, you're going to make mistakes. And so one of the things that I do, and even with people who are fairly junior, is I'll walk up to them like after a talk or something, and I'll say, rather than saying, how do you think that went? I'll say, give me one thing that you think I should do differently next time. You're changing the permission structure, right? The permission structure before was say nice things. And now the permission structure is, I am seeking your feedback, and success for you is sharing something that I can use next time. So often, I really value that. And I did this with at Ancestry. A lot of people have been in the company for a long time. They love the product. And, one of the things I did was I would host dinners every month for the entire time I was there. I met hundreds of employees. And at each dinner of 10 people, I would go around the table and I said, if you had a magic wand and you can change one thing about this company, what would you change? It could be our customers, it could be our ads, it could be our product. And each of them brought up really interesting things that I could never have seen, because, some of them were idiosyncratic, but others were like, yeah, I saw that too. But you're actually, success, again, you're giving the permission structure is to say something that other people could react to, that could be actionable. And in those meetings, in those dinners, it felt like we were problem solving as opposed to criticizing. Because now you're giving a permission structure that's very different than the one that they had before, which is don't complain, just put your head down. And that's not what the kind of meals I wanted to have. So we would argue about the different ideas and we would debate. And, one person said, I really wish that legal would get our contracts done faster. And sitting next to her, unbeknownst to her, was the head of legal who was doing contracts. And he said, well, the problem is actually we have a really convoluted system, and it takes a long time for these contracts to get to us. And suddenly someone's looking into this. And so it is really small things where, opening up the door to hear ideas is so important as a leader, because otherwise people don't feel comfortable. That's not their natural inclination, is to criticize, because so many leaders don't want to hear it.
And giving people permission is an incredibly simple idea, but incredibly difficult on both sides.
Yes. Yes. And it's, especially when there's power distance, or where it feels like somebody is much more senior than you, you feel like you don't have permission. And so I have really believe in turning that on its head.
You tell us a bit about Women in Product, which you were the co-founder of in 2016. What was, I mean, it's kind of ignited an entire kind of movement behind it now. But can you tell us about the genesis of it? What drove you to be involved with it?
Yeah, I mean, it started in 2012, actually. We were hosting a series of dinners every quarter because our company had so few women product leaders at the time. It was a small company. Facebook was really small when I joined, it was a few hundred people. And we just had, and mostly we required computer science degrees to actually move into product. And so those of us who made it in actually went through the side door. A lot of us were product marketers. We moved into product management without a computer science degree. And so we decided to set up these dinners and get to know women from throughout the industry as a way to, build community. And we did that for 4 years. In the fourth year, around 2015, early 2016, we said, we were having dinner with these folks, and we said, who's going to Grace Hopper this year? And, Grace Hopper was something that we had a lot of us had gone to over the years. And we said, well, why don't we have our own conference? And at the table with a bunch of strangers, we decided we were going to create our own conference. I know that sounds crazy. And we created a Facebook group, and and suddenly people started joining. And when we opened up the conference tickets, we had 300 tickets, and 3,000 people applied. And we realized that's what product market fit really looks like. And I just remember my friend Ami Vora, who was there in the early days, she was like, this is what product market fit looks like. Let's make this happen. And so, with several of our friends, Fiji and a bunch of folks, we built the first conference, we launched it. And, then people, companies are like, how do we sponsor it? And we thought, actually, we were just funded by our own company. And so we didn't know what to do next. And so we had to create an entity, created a nonprofit. We started raising a budget. And now, we have a multi-million-dollar budget so that we can put on these conferences. And, we have chapters all over the world. We have a couple dozen chapters all over the world where women communities can gather and spend time together.
So this product market fit is really about empowerment, right? Because when you empower the customer, you're actually having that product market fit. As leaders, we're about empowering our employees. That's how we scale ourselves and grow. And you wrote this book when you first became CEO of Ancestry. I remember seeing an early draft of it, and it's called Take Back Your Power. So can you connect the dots for us of this book, Take Back Your Power, which is about lessons to empower the reader to have a sense of agency, connected with your first time CEO role, which is the CEO of Ancestry. Knit for us together some of the feelings and thoughts around that.
Well, one of the things that I realize is we have so much more power than we think we do. And often I remember my coach, my leadership coach would always tell me in any situation I would bring up, I would say, this happened. And then she'd say, why did you give away your power? And I would say, what do you mean? And she said, just think about it. And I would think about it. And she's like, you have more power in your hands than you think you do. What could you have done, in power if you felt confident that you could get this done? And I think it was a great provocation. And that's why I named the book, Take Back Your Power. And it's because it is so often we feel powerless in these situations, but even the sliver of power we do have, we give away. And so how do we expand that? How do we open the door? How do we extend that to more opportunity and opportunity for each other as well? And so I wrote this book with that in mind. And, when I stepped into the CEO of Ancestry role, I published a book right around the same time I was working on it, kind of throughout the process. It was such a big change in me becoming an author as well as becoming CEO. But, this is a 40-year-old company who's been around for so long and done so many incredible things. And I wanted to make sure that I did justice to the work that I was doing there, which meant every single day really owning who I was, owning what opportunities we had, and really leading from the front, which was something I felt really uncomfortable with for a long time. And, I felt like the company was just had such an opportunity to bring, family history to so many people. And so it was an opportunity of a lifetime. And I had an incredible 4 years there.
Cool. And with that, it was because taking back your power, we write books not because we have answers, but because we're searching for answers to questions that we have. And we're our first readers, our first customers of those answers. And so stepping in, because I remember like we talked a lot at that time too, stepping into that CEO role it is you have to understand the positional power that you hold so that you can leverage it in the way that is the best for the company.
Yes.
You've written elsewhere, Deb, about being an introvert. In what ways that affected your career? I mean, are you an introvert? Or?
I am absolutely an introvert. As I said, I grew up in a small town in the deep South. I mean, I remember people coming up to my family and saying, "Go back to where you came from." Right? There was a lot of verbal and racial comments that came at us because we were so different. Like we joked that there was like one Asian family in every town in South Carolina. We were the one for our town. And when you're so different, that's the thing people pick on. And that's where people, and it was really hard. And so I made myself smaller. So my answer was make yourself smaller. My parents were like, ignore them. Don't draw attention to yourself, right? I learned early on that if you didn't draw attention to yourself, maybe people would comment less. And it was a safety mechanism. And I just remember, brick by brick, I built this wall up that said, if I just worked hard and got things done, then I didn't have to, lead. I didn't have to be out in the front. I didn't have to invite comment. And that works really well, by the way, until it stops working. So it worked through engineering school, because, no class participation. You just have to be smart enough to get through the test, and then I became a consultant.
That's not changed now at Duke, just
changing now. And back then it was really different. And then, I went to Boston Consulting Group, and I just remember doing excellent work and not getting the top bonus. And I remember asking the partner I worked for, and he's like, "You're kind of bad at the client part of client service." And I didn't really know what he meant. He's like, "Part of what we do is hang out with the clients, spend time with them, understand what they need. You do objectively good work, but you're really bad at the client service part." And I couldn't quite understand what he was saying. And so I go off to business school, and, I'm at Stanford, and I'm taking organizational behavior. And then they explain how organizations work, right? Which is how influence works, how you get things done, how promotions happen. And at the end, the test said, what would you do differently as a result of this class? And I wrote, "I will be an extrovert at work." And it has been a journey. I have to tell you, from somebody who never said anything. Most recently at the Women Product Conference this week, one of my colleagues, she was on the eBay side, I was on the PayPal side. She's like, the first time I met Deb, she was a baby PM. I had literally just been a product manager for like a couple weeks when we were acquired by eBay, and she was on the eBay side, I was on the PayPal side. She's like, "You would be surprised, but Deb never said anything. She was the quietest person." And she was absolutely right. And so she's like, and she's going to come on stage and talk to 1,000 of you right now. And so, I do think that it's been a journey. It's been an evolution for sure.
I think I've read some research that said that a lot of CEOs begin life as introverts, but actually learn how to manage being an introvert and an extrovert. And there's a guy called Carl Moore from McGill who's coined the phrase ambivert, I think. And I think it's that ability to appreciate the benefits of being an introvert, the kind of strength that gives you, but also the necessity at times to be an extrovert. So it's able to kind of turn it off and on, or be aware of it, I guess.
And I do think that's an important skill. I have so many people come to me. I coach a lot of women in particular, and they'll say, "Well, you don't understand. I'm an introvert." And I'll say, "So was I," but that doesn't mean that you give away power because you're an introvert. You just have to choose your moments. You have to pick what matters to you. It doesn't mean you don't advocate for promotion, or you don't, ask for the tough assignment. It just means you do it, in your own way. And so finding a way to do that, because, one of the things I told them as a leader, I realized that if people don't tell you what they want, you're not going to get it for them. But so often things happen because somebody told me, "Hey, I'm interested in X." And I said, "Oh, I know this opportunity to connect you with Y. Let's make that happen." And so often we kind of use introversion as a crutch, which is, "I'm introverted, therefore I can't." And I'm like, "No, you can. You just have to, yes, it's uncomfortable, but it's like exercising a muscle. You just have to do it."
And what I'm taking away from there is we're not yet whom we shall become, right? Which is one of my favorite quotes by Martin Luther, is we're all growing, we're evolving, and we can layer and layer and layer on other skill sets and expand. Otherwise, we're we don't want to always be stuck to be the person we were, but we're continuing to grow. And then two, there's beautiful aspects of being an introvert, which is the reflection, right? The idea of great introverts know how to have those one-on-one conversations. They know how to interrogate their beliefs and assumptions, and to be able to be then articulate about why they do the things that they do. And then on the extroversion part, it is about connecting and being able to scale that whatever it is you're trying to communicate, scale on the larger level. And so I do think leaders have to take on both skill sets, right? So at this point, we're entering into the short form portion of our interview. And the first question I'll toss to you is, Deb, what would others say is a superpower of yours?
Oh, so I always joke that I'm a super connector. That's something which is whenever I meet somebody, I can visually think of two or three people or places or things that they should connect with. And it's just an intuitive thing that I've developed over the years, which it comes second nature now. I would say that early in my career, it was definitely not like that. So it's something I've developed over the years.
What's something about you that most people don't know, but that which shapes how you lead?
Shapes how I lead. I think that one of the things that let me think about this. I think one of the things that I love is I love reading. And it helps me to be in the mind of someone else, both fiction and nonfiction, to be in the mind and ideas of someone else, because I think it makes me a much more empathetic leader.
How do you see the extraordinary and full range of capabilities that a teammate can bring to the table? What are some of the rituals or practices that you use to really get to know them?
I envision someone as a garden, which is I'm not there. There's a book called The Carpenter and the Gardener about raising children, which is, are you cultivating somebody, or are you kind of thawing them down and turning them into what you want? I use the same philosophy for team members as well, which is, they are who they are. You are there to get the most out of them, guide them, and help them, as opposed to sawing them down and making them fit into exactly what it is that you do. I love that concept, both for team members and for raising children.
Who have been your mentors in your career, Deb?
I've had incredible sponsors and mentors throughout the years. A lot, early on, I said Amy Clement was my first, she was the first head of product I worked for at PayPal. Obviously, people know Sheryl Sandberg. She has been incredibly influential in my career. I've had such great managers and mentors that, I continue to stay in touch with. Doug Purdy was the one who really was a turning point in my career at Facebook. I have had so many great people who have supported me. And I would say that without them, I would not be where I am today.
So, Deb, if you could give your younger self one piece of leadership advice, what would it be?
This is the piece of advice I give everybody who is younger today, which is always be learning, because somebody who is, an expert, someone who's learning will always exceed the expert over time, because they're growing, they're adapting, they're changing. And I think we have this fixed mindset often. The way we teach in school is like, you ace the test, you get mastery, and then you're done. But actually, it's a three-dimensional thing. You're growing and changing over time, and the environment's changing too. And so it's not a fixed point in time. It's somebody who's actually reaching will always get further.
You've had a fantastic career, Deb. Some big names in your career: Stanford, PayPal, etc. But there must have been failures along the way. Can you share a favorite failure? What failure really ignited learning within you and really changed the way you look at the world?
I share the story in the book, which was, there was one job. I did all the jobs I wanted to at Facebook. I was there 11 years. I got a chance to build my dream product, which is Facebook Marketplace. But there was one job I never got. And I went to Mark and I told him I wanted that job. He picked somebody else. When the job was open again, I asked him for the job again. And he said, not only will I not give you that job, I don't think you'll ever get that job while you're here. And each time I had to decide, what I was going to do differently. And in so many ways, that freed me to do, I turned the job I was in to the job I wanted. And so I didn't, at first I was devastated. But at the same time, it goes from, you can choose something as a stumbling block, or you can use it as a stepping stone towards what you want. And so I do think that, sometimes the answer, the hard no, is a better gift than an easy yes or maybe.
That's so wise and beautiful. So now we're entering into the lightning round, which is short 1 to 3 word answers. And for this, we'll ask you a series of rapid fire questions, and Stuart will take it away.
Okay.
Your favorite novel, Deb?
Ooh, novel. I have to think about that one. Let's come back to it. Favorite business book? Let me think about that one too. I'm like really bad at this. I'm terrible. I can't I'm like frozen. Okay.
Are you an early bird or a night owl?
Definitely night owl.
One app you can't live without.
Ooh, so I intermittent fast, and I love Zero, the app that tracks your intermittent fasting, and I use it every single day.
Well, it's funny because my next one was, what's your go-to comfort food?
I love soup. I love every kind of soup from every culture. Soup is amazing, and I think that it is what nurtures the soul.
Favorite place?
I love curling up in my bed and reading a book.
Which brings us back to your favorite novel.
My favorite novel. Ooh, I'm trying to think. So very recently, I'll just tell you a novel that I read recently. So my friend wrote Love Boat Taipei, and it is such a crazy adventure, and it reflects a lot of myself in it when I was 18. And so I love that book, and it was recently made into a movie too.
And we should ask you as well about your next book. You've written one book, so it's inevitable. There's got to be another book, and you've got help.
So I am very excited. Well, first, Sonia and I said that we're going to write the Super Connectors book at some point, so we're going to work on that. But before that, we're both writing something, and I want to write a book about the next chapter, which is what the art of what's next.
You heard it here first.
So, Deb, this has been so lovely, and you've given us so much to think about. Stuart, what's a key takeaway for you in this conversation?
I think giving people permission. I think it goes back to some of the other conversations we've had with CEOs and leaders who are intent on distributing leadership or kind of redistributing leadership. So I think giving people permission is just a really nice thing, isn't it? And as Deb said, you just rephrasing things makes a hell of a difference. I think the power of going in as the customer is really underestimated, because customers are often forgotten in the C-suite, in my humble opinion. Falling in love with the problem is a really nice challenge, but something is really powerful as well. And I think the thing about leaders not getting hard feedback is incredibly true. And as part of the isolation that CEOs and leaders often feel, because they don't get any real feedback or any hard feedback as well. So really, really interesting points. Sanya?
I would say my favorite, and Deb and I have a lot of these conversations, and so it was like, oh, now we're sharing them with the world, some of the wisdom that Deb brings to the table. I really do love the fall in love with the problem, not the solution. I would say then fall in love with the problem, not the solution, because the solution is fixed. The problem is contextually based. So the solution, if you fall in love with the problem, then you will always evolve the solution to be the right fit for the context. And it also takes the ego out of it, because sometimes it's when we fall in love with a solution that we get egotistical or defensive about the solution rather than what's best for the customer or the employee. And I also love this idea of what you said about growth, always evolving, always be curious, always growing. And so along with that, this idea of layering and being able to, fortune favors the bold. So boldly go into where serendipity may take you, whether it's that starting job at PayPal, where you were just sharing how you felt about the product because you're an avid user of it, or you're talking to Brad about the Intuit and how you felt about it, because people connect with that sort of energy. You know, how about you, Deb? What were, like, in the reflection of answering these questions, were there key things that stood out for you?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is the thing that I hope people take away when I share my experience is that, there's no one answer. Your journey is your journey. And as I kind of threaded through and walked through my journey, I people say, well, what's next? But it's really hard to look forward 10 years. And it's easier to look backwards 10 years. And so one of the things I encourage you to do is take those risks. Put yourself out there, because you don't know where that next thing is going to lead. Learn how to say yes to the right things and make it the best you possibly can.
That's so beautiful. Stuart, do you want to wrap up?
We recommend Deb's book, Take Back Your Power. There'll be more books to come in the future, perhaps. We'll see. We'll see. And Deb's work on Substack is worth checking out as well. I know I subscribe. Amazing career to date, and some really brilliant insights, Deb. We really appreciate your time. Choosing your moments. That was the other thing I meant to say as well. That's really powerful, I think, because that's a really practical thing. Choosing your moment to be more extroverted or to push yourself forward, and it's question of time. But I think choosing your moments is a really powerful and simple and persuasive idea. Deb, thank you very much. As always, Sanyin, thank you to you as well.
Thank you.